Today, we are talking all things drive modes on your cameras, what they are, how the different drive modes work, how to use them, and when to use them. If you haven't messed around with the different drive modes on your camera before, then usually when you want to take a picture, you press down on the shutter and you take a picture. When you want to take another picture, you have to press down on the shutter again and it takes another single shot. This is usually the default drive mode and it's called single shot drive mode. This is a great setting for everyday shooting when you have a bit of time and you can really take your time in between shots. But if you're going to be shooting something really fast moving, you may want to choose a different drive mode that's available on your camera. Now, all different cameras will have slightly different functions, and depending on the brand, they may call the drive modes slightly different names, but these are the general drive modes that you're going to find on most new DSLR or mirrorless cameras. Welcome back to the series, Everything I Learned in Photography School, where I'm currently sharing with you guys everything I learned through my undergrad and master's photography school education in quick and easy to follow 10-minute or under lessons. Remember to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a new video. I post new videos weekly about photography and filmmaking. In this lesson, we are talking drive modes on your camera. The first one that I mentioned briefly before is single shot drive mode. Single shot drive mode is exactly as it sounds. When you have this mode selected, you'll press down on your shutter button and your camera will take one single image. Even if you press and hold your shutter release button, generally the camera will still only take the one image. This is the default mode that's usually set on most new cameras, and for good reason. It's usually the default mode for most photographers who know their drive modes as well, because it allows you to take just the one single shot that you know you need, especially if you're not shooting something that's going to be moving really fast. It allows you to take just the one shot and avoid really filling up your memory card with images that look identical. Single shot drive mode is usually the key choice for photographers that are shooting products, still life, landscapes, or even portraits where you're framing it up and you can move at a slower pace, or your subject isn't going to be drastically moving around really fast. However, you wouldn't want to use single shot drive mode if you're going to be shooting something like sports, kids, cars, anything really in action or fast moving, because you're most likely going to take just the one single shot at the wrong time and miss your peak action or the point that you intended to have. This brings me to the next drive mode we're going to talk about, which is called continuous or burst mode. Depending on your camera brand, make, what you will, they'll call it one or the other, but for the sake of this video and because I think it's more often called continuous mode, we're going to call this mode continuous mode. And in this drive mode, this is where your camera is going to take multiple images in a row. When you select continuous drive mode, your camera is going to keep taking pictures for as long as you hold your finger down on that shutter release button. If your camera stops taking images while you have the shutter button held down, it's probably because the memory card is too slow, so it's buffering, or the memory card is full, or your camera is slow and it's buffering. If you know you're going to be shooting in continuous mode a lot, or you have a specific job coming up, I would definitely suggest investing in a solid fast memory card, because you don't want your image sequence to sort of fritz out in the middle because your memory card is too slow. When shooting in continuous mode, you also want to make sure you have the right autofocus mode selected as well. If you're using continuous autofocus mode, this may actually slow down the overall drive mode sequence because your camera is going to try and refocus the frame in between each framed shot. For example, if you're using continuous autofocus, this may actually slow down. For example, if you're using continuous autofocus, this may actually slow down your drive mode sequence because your camera is going to try and refocus the shot in between each new frame. If you select single autofocus mode, then your camera is going to set that determined focus at the beginning of the sequence and not change focus in between frames until the end. If your subject is moving towards or away from you, it's generally a good idea to select continuous autofocus unless you're confident enough that you've selected a deep enough depth of field that your subject will stay sharp throughout your continuous burst. If your subject is going parallel to you along your depth of field, then you should be crystal clear using single shot focus mode. If you want to learn more about autofocus modes, check out that lesson where I break down what they are, how they work, how to use them, when to use them. I will link that above here and also below in the description box so that you can check it out later after this video is over. Seriously, don't click out yet. We're not done yet. Another thing to consider about continuous focus mode is that you usually get two options, a low mode and a high mode. In low continuous shooting, your camera will take multiple shots still in a sequence, but at a slower pace. This is good if you want a couple of variations in movement, but not fill up your memory card super quickly. If you're shooting extremely fast-moving subjects like cars, sports, wildlife, then you probably want to be using high continuous burst mode in order to capture the maximum amount of images at the fastest rate possible. The only issue you may face with shooting at such a high continuous burst mode is that you may have a hard time keeping your subject in focus, especially since you're shooting at such a fast pace and if your subject is already moving at a super fast pace. If you're shooting everyday photography and you're not quite sure what you may come across, you may want to consider shooting in continuous drive mode. However, if you're going to be shooting in continuous drive mode, don't forget to have a super fast memory card on hand so that if you do want those sequence shots, you're not going to be wasted just buffering. You may also want to consider shooting in low continuous drive mode if you have that option, because that way you don't end up filling up your memory card with images that look all identical. Let's move on to self-timer drive mode. Self-timer is usually pretty self-explanatory. Your camera will generally count down a number of seconds before the shutter releases and your image is made. Usually on most cameras you have two options, 2 seconds or 10 seconds. Self-timer is a great option for night shooting or shooting with longer exposures where you want to try and avoid camera shake by actually pressing the shutter button before the camera records the actual image. Because even if you have your camera on a tripod, even just pressing your shutter release button can sometimes cause shutter shake. It's also an okay option for if you're on family vacation where you need to sort of set up the camera before and run into the shot, or if you're taking self-portraits where the situation is a bit similar. But in those instances, I would highly recommend a remote release. Remote release is another drive mode which most cameras offer. It allows you to fire your camera without ever having to press the shutter release button on your camera, and is usually done through a remote which can be attached through a long cable to your actual camera body, or even better, a wireless remote. Different cameras have different ways to connect the remote control. My Sony camera even has an app which allows me to use my phone as a wireless remote control. I can frame up my shot, see my shot in my phone before I take it, and even change the settings. Using a wireless remote is a much better option than only using self-timer alone, because you're not constrained by the camera's countdown numbers and having to run back and forth to the camera. You can use a combination of a wireless remote and also a self-timer on most instances as well. The last common drive mode that I'm going to talk about is mirror lockup. This mode doesn't really apply to mirrorless cameras. It's often used to help minimize the blur caused by camera shake. If you have this mode selected, your camera will wait until the mirror is locked up before it takes the picture. This mode is really specialist and is sometimes used by landscape or night photographers working with really long shutter speeds where the slightest vibration in the camera's mirror box mechanism can cause a shake and ruin the entire image. It's often combined with a remote release and the camera would always be placed on a tripod. Mirror lockup mode is not always in the same location as the rest of your drive modes on your camera, so you may have to check your manual to find out where it is in your camera settings if you're looking at playing around with that mode. It's a good idea to remember to check your drive modes before you start shooting, especially if you're using different types of drive modes on the same shoot or if you were using a different drive mode on your last shoot, because you don't want to have the wrong drive mode selected at the wrong time and say miss your big shot because it was on self-timer when it should have been on high continuous. How you change your drive modes will vary from camera to camera, but it can often be found in the internal camera menu and also sometimes set to be used with the external camera wheels. So just check your manual and figure out how to change those settings. I hope this video was able to explain drive modes super clearly for you guys, and now you're able to choose exactly what's best for you. If you like this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and remember to subscribe to my channel, otherwise you'll miss all my new videos that I post every week. Before we sign off, I would love to see you all on Instagram, and you can follow me at Gabrielle Reddick for all of the latest. As always, please drop a comment below. I love to hear from you guys. See you in the next video.